Let me welcome everybody and call the meeting to order. I hope everybody had really wonderful holidays, some time to be with friends and family and eat really well and maybe get some time to relax and just rejuvenate. I'd love to hear how that was true for everybody, but given how little time we have, I think we're just going to launch right in. Unfortunately or fortunately, I have been advised by counsel that I can no longer point to your screen and say, look at the statement. I believe Ginger has agreed to do a dramatic reading of the statement that needs to be read. So bear with us as she actually reads the statement. And Ginger, I just sprung that on you. So if you aren't ready for the dramatic reading, I'm sorry. Just read it for us. Thanks.
I will read it, and I'll go through it as quickly as possible, with or without dramatics. So the Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for funding public education. Before we begin, the department would like to remind you of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula.
Thanks, Ginger. And then let me call the roll. If you are here, signify by saying here or something like that. Scott Bacon. Senator Richard Briggs. Katie Kaur.
Here.
Stan Harville.
Here.
Representative David Hawk.
I am here.
Chris Lestos.
Here.
Lisa Trail.
Here.
I know Lynn Volz is not with us today. Amanda Waddell. All right. We have that for the record. I want to just take a quick minute to give you my sense of this meeting and the next couple of meetings, just so you know the road we're on. Today, we're going to review and revise our must-have list. We also are going to review and discuss and perhaps prioritize the items on our outcomes list. That's the list of things we want to incentivize or have the funding formula incentivize. Also review and discuss and prioritize additional dollars. And if we have time, also our idea about weights. That's today's hour. In between today and 2 weeks from now, I believe the State Department of Ed is going to review and release a draft funding formula that will not include dollars, but will be an overview, and we'll ask for public comment. We will spend some time therefore at our next meeting number 5, looking at that draft funding formula and looking at public comment. And then in light of our conversations so far on outcomes and weights and our list and additional dollars, we'll have access to an expert from the Department of Education that we could direct some questions to. Because I'm hoping at our 6th meeting, we'll not only have finalized our lists and our priorities within the weights and the outcomes and the additional dollars, but also some of the larger issues around policy. It's up to us to decide what those larger policy issues are. I think we've already discussed, and I think the commissioner at various points has also sort of brought out questions about do we want to talk about recommending more funding? Do we want to make sure that the funding is limited to just public schools, or would it be possible to allow some of the funding to go to vouchers or private schools? What about teacher pay? Where do we want to make a policy recommendation about teacher compensation? What about recurring funds? What policy recommendations, if any, do we want to make on that? And then a question that's been brought up in a number of the committees is, what about an oversight committee for the year after the formula? All of those, I'm not suggesting those are what we should do. I'm just suggesting those are things that we may want to consider in that 6th meeting, and also may spur some thought for the questions you may want to ask of the expert. Ginger, have we gotten confirmation about an expert? Is that on their list? Do we know we have one?
We are on the list for one, so it is in the works, and there should not be a problem with them joining us for our next meeting.
Terrific.
I don't have that date in front of me, but it is at the end of our PowerPoint slide.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a problem for them to be with us.
Yeah, I think it's 2 weeks from today. I think it is the 19th, same time, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. And we'll give you a reminder just to a week from now about thinking about questions you may want to ask. But that's the plan for the next 3 meetings, and we'll decide if we need, more time, another meeting as we go forward. Okay, so that's where we're going. We'll just keep rolling right along here. I think the really challenging work right now is to look at the list that we've created. And Ginger, can you put that up as well? This is the list. Thank you. This is the list we have, and I guess a number of questions. First, if people would take a look at it and see first, is there anything we want to add? And I'll make this a 2-part question. Is there anything on this list that someone would suggest we could move from the must-have to the should-have? So take a minute, look at it. Is there something that's missing? Or is there something that we could move off of the must-have list?
Dan, I saw the one thing, I know one thing that I brought up was the department chairs in high school. I think all the high schools already have department chairs, and so do some of the middle schools. What I was driving at there was maybe there'd be a stipend or something with that. That is definitely not a must-have. So that one I feel can easily come off there. That could be something that even the school systems eventually have to take care of. But that definitely can come off that list.
Terrific. We'll do that. I think what will happen at the end of this, Ginger, as she always does, will take incredibly good notes, and within about 7 minutes of the end of the meeting, she'll send it back out to all of us. But we'll move that to the other list unless somebody's going to fight about that. Otherwise, other thoughts of things to either move or add?
I also was looking at the healthier and higher quality meals, thinking that actually is funded through the federal government. So I don't know that there's a state dollar that's associated with it. That was one of those where I'm like, is that one of those that we really want to get into that, because that is a federal dollar? Unless I'm wrong. But I don't think I am. I think it's federal funds.
And even though I strongly support training for cultural competency and cultural responsiveness, I think that level of detail is probably not appropriate for a subcommittee. So definitely dollars devoted to professional development or professional learning, but not with that level of detail, in my opinion.
I would agree with you, Katie.
I agree.
One of the things I wondered at the bottom of this list, I think, is funded pre-K. And I'm wondering if we wanted to keep that at there or make it voluntary pre-K. There was some discussion.
Are you saying voluntary to fund the voluntary pre-K program that exists now?
Yeah, or perhaps even expand it.
Yeah, okay.
But that it's not that we're recommending that it's fully funded for everybody. And I'm just wondering how the group feels on that.
Certainly, it's going to be a lot of dollars added if you start funding pre-Ks across the state.
Yeah, because you're not only talking about teachers, you're talking about space, buildings, everything, infrastructure, and all of that. So that could become a black hole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even their little chairs and things have to be a different level than like a 5th grade table kind of thing. So, I mean, I do think it's a pre-K needs to be looked at overall, but I'm not sure that that's.
Well,
I mean,
I guess
early literacy is there, so I kind of struggle between the two, but I don't think that. I think you're going to have to add a whole lot of dollars if you add that funded pre-K.
I would personally think we should keep the voluntary pre-K.
Yes.
As part of it.
Yeah, I think it's a strong statement for us to just include pre-K. I'm not exactly sure what that should look like at the end of the day, but just the fact that we've had a really good, robust conversation about it last time, I think, or maybe 2 times ago, about the importance of starting as early as possible. And, it doesn't mean every student in the entire state needs to be funded for pre-K. Many people choose not to send their kids to pre-K, or they do different, church programs or whatever. But I feel really, I think it's great if we keep something in there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, this is David. I'll agree as well. And as you're looking at, and not to wordsmith too much, but funding at risk and voluntary pre-K, because there is a segment of the population that we really want to get into pre-K, and that is the at-risk segment of the population that should be, I'll cross my fingers, it should be participating right now, but maybe that throws too much words in there, but just to continue funding pre-K at the existing level and possibly add a potential for a more robust voluntary pre-K program. I think that may get where you're looking at, Katie. That's a lot of words. So
that's right.
Ginger, I'll allow you to do the Reader's Digest version of what we just said.
So we're going to adjust this one to say that we want to keep it as the voluntary pre-K. We want that fully funded at the existing level as part of the state funding formula. And then the last part of that was making that more robust, but help me with the in what way part.
More opportunities for voluntary, because there are a limited number of seats. And I know some parents who have put their names on a waiting list to try to get into the pre-K. Their family income was higher than it than would allow them to go into the at-risk pre-K students, but they really wanted to have the pre-K, and they were not engaged in another pre-K program through a faith-based organization or other high-quality daycare. So again, that's a lot of words.
But Ginger, I think taking out the at the existing level is actually important, because I think what Representative Hawk is saying is that we need to make sure that those kids are still covered, but that there's other kids who, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Representative Hawk, but there's other kids who are not accessing it because there's not enough seats.
That's exactly right.
So we want to expand voluntary pre-K, but keep it voluntary. So it is there. We're not mandating it, but it is part of this funding formula.
Yeah.
Got it.
And just looking at the qualifications, is that what you're talking about? Representative, maybe opening those up a little bit more, because it is really limited as to who will qualify to get in it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that makes perfect sense.
Something else that might just be semantics, but can we combine the professional learning and professional development? Are we not talking about the same thing there?
You're talking about these two.
Yes. I mean, professional learning and professional development to me is the same thing.
So we want to move the professional learning out of that must-haves as well, right?
Yeah, because I think if you're addressing professional development, you're addressing your professional learning. Yes.
And I think that what Katie was saying earlier, like the professional development, which could include training for cultural competency. So what you were saying, Katie, like that's not the only professional development that we're.
Yes, and I just don't, I think state guidance tends to not be that specific. It gives a lot more authority to locals to decide what to do with those dollars, but I certainly support that as an effort, but I don't think it'll pass muster in terms of how the state usually delivers its recommendations.
So would the recommendation here be that we leave some sort of funding for professional learning in the recommendation for the formula, but that we actually just move the specificity for what that professional development is out of that? So maybe we keep professional learning, but this piece about what the professional development is focusing on, that is too specific for what our role is as a subcommittee. Okay.
Also, I assume that some of the initiatives that just have been started in the last year or so, and I'm really focusing on trauma-informed schools, that's going to carry on, or do we need to say that that's something that needs to continue? Because that's a state level thing that is happening now, but is it going to get rolled into this or what? I guess that's a question more than it is an addition, and that falls under that professional development, professional learning type deal too.
Yeah.
I think right now it's an opportunity that districts and schools can choose to participate in. So I guess that would be the question of whether that's something this subcommittee would see as an opportunity that should receive direct funding outside of the funds that are currently, how the current funds are currently being provided. And if so, does that belong here in the base, or does that belong over in that direct funding section?
Yeah.
And that may be a conversation you want to have at another time.
Right. I think you hit the nail on the head right there of what the question is. Yeah.
I guess I would think that it should be on this list. It seems to me the research is increasingly clear how important it is. And I think it's something that should be on this list. I don't know how others feel. Well, we'll probably have another go round on that, but one that I guess I want to get the group's input. We have on this equitable field trip experiences. I think I shared with the group. We've convened a couple of groups of students who are first-year college students. And as they looked at our list, which is first they had to do their own list, but then they looked at our list. And one of the things that we heard a lot from both of the groups of students was the inequitable after-school activities. What was available at some schools is not available at all schools. And so I'm just wondering if we might want to expand the field trip to include also after-school activities. And I'm not sure it's equitable as one piece, but also adequate. So I'm just wondering if that's something we could consider. I don't know if that's a must-have, but we certainly heard a lot from students on that.
And are those, when we're looking at state funding, is that something that are their field trip experiences or after school experiences state funded now? Or is it just because they have better booster clubs or that type?
I believe it's part of the school's funding, so it is not booster funding.
Okay.
But honestly, I don't know where that line of funding comes from. Is it from the district or the state? Need to find out on that.
Yeah, because that's one of those where I could see students saying, yeah, this high school has this, but ours doesn't. But it's really coming from booster clubs versus state funding. But I totally get where you're coming from. And that's what the children are remembering. It keeps them in school. If they have that equitable after school programs, a lot of times they stay in the school. So
that's what was so compelling for me. This was 2 or 3 different students talking about, because these were students who are now enrolled in college, and they're talking about what really got them. These are all economically challenged kids who've succeeded, and they cite after school activities as being really important.
Dan, were they talking about like extracurriculars like athletics, or were they talking about like academic enrichment activities and tutoring, or okay? Yeah, I
we're
like
not talking about tutoring. They were talking more about a computer club. They were talking about their basketball team had to get coaches to drive them to games because they didn't have buses. If the coach didn't come, they didn't go, that kind of thing.
which happens a lot.
Yeah, I like the idea of broadening it per your recommendation, Dan. That makes a lot of sense to me.
And I agree. And I think the after school piece on the enrichment is so critical. On the field trip side of things, I know in the Knoxville area, so many of our partners who work with schools on the receiving end of students coming to their places are doing a really good job of trying to do what they can virtually and other things to make it more equitable. Obviously with COVID has driven a lot of that, but I think it's going to net out a much more positive and more equitable experience for students in our marketplace. And I'm sure that's true across the state.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, after we're finished with this conversation, I'd also like to talk just this one above it about the equitable early gifted testing, because my concern with it is if we're saying it's important for us to fund early gifted testing, but we don't follow it up with offering any type of gifted courses or endorsements for teachers or anything like that, then we just have a bunch of children that's identified that we're not doing anything with. Because a gifted, equitable, I understand. So, because a gifted child that's an inner city child is going to have maybe a different need than a gifted child who has been in the best preschools and everything else and has all of these, because it goes back to those equitable after school activities, because one parent is going to be taking their kid to every science fair possible, and the other one who's been identified won't have those same opportunities. And then you just get in the weeds everywhere, so I apologize.
Well, I think our issue may be that word equitable. I understand that we want everybody to have the same thing, but kids in Hamlin County are not going to have, are going to have more access to some things than kids in Cocke County, Hancock County. I think that's going to be different system to system to system. I'm not saying it's not important, but we may run into some problems there.
So that's again something we can all think a little bit about as we come back to it. Is there better wording for it? Are there other things people want to add to the list? Thank you, Representative. Have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks. I'm wondering also on this, if we really want to wade into the trickier waters here, do we have not done a particularly good job of moving lots of things off this list, which is fine. I didn't think we would. But are there things here that we think are especially important, I guess is the question. And Ginger, maybe you can help me on this, but I think we had talked about first identifying, are there items on the list that we're saying everything is a must-have, but even within the must-haves, the things that matter the most for us to have the funding formula that best serves our kids. So I'm wondering if we could take a minute and begin to prioritize. If we, and this is dangerous, I know, but if we each had 5 votes, what would your 5 be? And if some one of you wants to be particularly brave after you've taken a minute and put your 5 out, then maybe we can add to that others that weren't in your 5. Ginger, is that, you and I talked about this before, but that's some of what we're being asked to do, right? To try and show top priority within the must-have?
Yes, we want to really look at what are those highest priorities within the things we've identified as our must-haves, and then what might fall to that next tier within those must-haves and so on. So I think if you guys want to share those, like Dan said, your top 5, and then we can see, what other things did people have? Where did you all have consensus in those 5? And then what are some other things that people selected in their top 5 that we may want to have discussion about, and try to see what were our top tier for must-haves, and then what are those next level for the must-haves. So you can kind of think about, in the email we sent out, it said, highest priority, medium priority, and so on. So thinking through that lens, what would you say your top 5 would be for these, so we can kind of come to consensus on those things?
Before we get started on that, can I make a suggestion that may clean a little bit of it up?
Sure.
Up there, like the 3rd item down where it says investments to create physically and emotionally safe environment for students, would it be possible to classify that like investments to create emotionally safe environments for students, and then list school counselors, mental health counselors, social workers, nurses underneath that, so that we're not burning, like, we all know those are important, but they really need to be classified in something that's really about the whole child.
I think that's a good point. And I was kind of going to say the same thing, Scott. Up there on the very first one, when we say high quality qualified teachers, we haven't said anything about administrators, those school leaders, and they're just, they're just as important.
Yeah, that's a pretty big miss. Thank you for calling that out. Yeah, so that would help, I think, with our list. So let's try that.
And I don't know if we need to break it emotionally safe away from physically necessarily, but just think categorizing that may help some.
So Scott, you are suggesting we put, would you put the mental health counselors?
School counselors, social workers, behavioral coaches, behavioral coaches, I think would be. Nurses, yeah. And again, just tossing that out.
Move them up here, and then you all can tell me if that makes sense for you.
Just bullet them underneath that or whatever.
I think that's so smart, because it's moving us away from a resource driven approach to a funding formula, which is really I understand why the department wants us to go through this process, because it's really hard to figure out how much to fund something without listing out the resources. But at the end of the day, we want the funding formula not to be listing out, okay, each nurse is worth this much. We want it to fund what the student needs. And I think that's really smart to kind of bucket it together as the emotional and mental health needs of a student, and what that entails. So I like that a lot.
And that might also be a spot, that bullet that's open right now, to put professional development related to those items, which kind of touches on what Stan talked about.
Oh, I like that a lot.
Okay, am I moving school counselors up here as well?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. What else am I missing from this list?
I'm wondering, and Scott, this is a question. Were you suggesting that we split emotional and physical safety so that one would be the emotional part and this other might be the facilities part? Or did I misunderstand that?
Well, I mean, certainly they're both related, but I almost feel like for our purposes they need to be, because the physical standpoint certainly deals with security issues, but also deals with facility issues and overall, like Stan was mentioning, the administrative piece, having the appropriate professional development for those individuals so they can provide the most physically safe environment for kids, in addition to having law enforcement involved in that.
I don't know if you can see the screen, but the second item there, investment in facilities for safety purposes, would that be bulleted?
I think so.
If at any point I'm putting these in the wrong places or rearranging incorrectly, tell me.
Do we want to add a bullet there about professional development related to those topics?
What's the group think on that?
Absolutely. The way it's worded right now would absolutely be including, you know, investments in those people and in their professional growth. I love that.
I think this is a good exercise to look at these and begin to bullet point those, because we can look at some other areas down through there, like technology and internet access and virtual education or digital classrooms, that we can kind of do the same thing with, you know, put those things under technology. And that kind of cleans our list up and then makes picking five a little easier.
We may get to five. One question on the school safety personnel to support. Does that go now with the list that we've started that's bulleted?
I would say yes.
And then I think EL teachers could go under teachers. There's probably a bucket of like high quality materials that can lump a couple of these together. So I like this activity a lot. It might be cheating a little bit because we're just consolidating everything, but it's making me happy.
I think you can put your assistant principals under there also.
Or have a whole separate category. Whoever called out, I think it was Stan, that school leadership is missing on here. So we might just put the assistant principals under there too.
Yeah. I think you need to put that in front of administrators. You need to put high quality, qualified, you know, same thing there, that, you know, let's not stick people in there that we don't need to.
Someone mentioned the high quality materials. Where did you want this one moved?
I think just the literacy, right, if you move your scroll, the literacy and numeracy materials and prioritize supports and materials to ensure reading can go under high quality materials.
Well, you could also probably do the same thing with media centers and libraries. I mean, that's, all of those are educational materials.
Yeah.
And again, it's just making sure we have enough money to afford. And I think when the way we're doing it makes it so that the state knows kind of what we're looking for, but it also gives the districts the ability to take and say, you know what, I don't need, I'm trying to think, like, maybe EL teachers are not their top priority. Maybe it is more of the instructional coaches or behavioral coaches that they need more, whereas with our growing cities, EL is a huge priority. So it allows them to take that lump of money and go, what is needed in our schools specifically, which goes back to having administrators who are qualified to know that.
There's also a broader bucket that might be something around like academic or supports or instructional supports, because there's instructional coaches on there, interventionist specialists, reading coaches at the bottom. So there could be something to bucket those folks together.
Summer programming could go under that as well. Yep.
Paraprofessionals for students with disabilities, although that's not always academic, but
yeah, but
same with the specific supports for students with disabilities.
So I'm wondering, with the time that we have left, do we want to complete this exercise, or perhaps we can redraft it and send it out? I think there'll be some things that don't fit, but by and large, looks like we have 4 or 5 major categories, and we can send that back out. Ginger, I'd welcome guidance here. I know we had talked about a couple of other things we needed to get accomplished in the time we had. Your sense from where we are and where we need to get to, should we finish putting everything under, or can we do this and send it back out to the group?
I think it might be it might be helpful for us to finish this part.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is I want to make sure that we can send over some like a recommendation for what this group really does want to see as those highest priorities for the base ahead of our next meeting. Because I definitely want to make sure that we get as much feedback submitted before that meeting 5. So I think it might be helpful to go ahead and do a little more of this. And then maybe we can spend like those last couple minutes just looking at that. I think outcomes was the one that we hadn't looked at yet. maybe we
Right.
can spend just a minute or two looking at that one.
Sounds great. You want to go to maybe go to the top and we'll just take one by one, what hasn't been bucketed?
I think your college and career counselors can go under academic supports.
Support staff, where do we want that?
I think they have to just kind of stand on their own. We've got to have them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
And it's a lot more too than just custodial and maintenance as well. Bus drivers, you know, I mean, there's so many clerical.
Yeah, budget. Okay.
Nutrition is a huge thing. So could we add into that support stuff? I mean, I'm like, the one thing that's come up for us so much lately is the subs, just having,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
you know, if we don't have our substitute
Yeah.
teachers, we can't move. And the pay for them is coming it's just, we're competing with McDonald's.
Yeah, we've had to shut down school last year just because of the sub crisis, not because of teacher crisis. It was insane.
Yeah, us too. We didn't shut them down, but yes, we feel it every day. Like, okay.
So EPSOs, where should that go?
Is that not an outcome? I mean, we're talking about AP passing certifications, dual enrollment, dual credit. I mean, absolutely, you know, those opportunities are a must have, but they almost, to me, fall under an outcome.
Well, would they fall under that? Probably not, but I'm trying to think about when we're going back to that conversation about those extracurricular activities. It's just that extra past the basic, and I don't know, that disregard. I can't make that thought pull together.
I think if I remember the conversation, we talked about it as, you know, I mean, like in Nashville, we have one of our magnet schools, which is an incredible school, has 26 AP courses, and then one of our lowest performing schools only has 2 AP courses. And so it was, I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was about like making sure that students in all schools have access to those courses. But I'm kind of with you, Stan. Like, I'm not sure if that needs to be on the must-have list. That might be able to, in my mind, be able to bump down to the nice to have, even though I'm a big fan of EPSOs.
Yeah, and it, to me, it almost, you know, it's going to fall under career and technical education. Their big umbrella with all of that.
All right, so let's try that in the move from must-haves list. On the one hand, we're sending something over, or we're submitting something, but this isn't the final thing that we'll do, so we can come back and look at it. I'm thinking the voluntary pre-K stays as its own. Is that what others are thinking? All right, so we've got professional learning, equitable early gifted testing, and equitable field trip and extracurricular programming.
Is this professional learning, do we still need this one since we listed it at the top, or is this like a separate focus of professional learning?
We could put it under the high quality teachers bucket, but it's not currently in the way that the BEP operates, but we certainly could lump that all together. We need high quality teachers, and one thing that has to be part of that is their professional learning. But I could see it as a standalone too.
I guess I would say let's try it up with the teachers and see how we like it there.
I kind of like having it under each one of those,
Yeah. Same
just because it does look different for each component.
Yeah. I like that.
Same thing for administrators, same thing for academic supports. And even technology for that matter. It's not a very good tool if you can't use it effectively.
Like that.
Would you also list it under this high quality materials area, or is that addressed, having it in academic supports as well as the teacher section?
I think you've got it covered in the other sections.
Yeah.
Do we have just infrastructure anywhere on our list?
Well, wouldn't that fall under investment in facilities? I know we say particularly for safety purposes, but
Yeah, I guess perhaps. I was. Can you go back to that one? I think it's scrolling up a little bit, Ginger. Or is it?
It's the third from the last bullet under investments to create a physically and emotionally safe environment for students.
Thank you. See, and I'm not sure it's just for safety purposes. I think safety is definitely there, but I think some of it is just some of our older schools need just some infrastructure as well. So.
Does that work, Lisa?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that if it's not. Yeah, that probably works. It's just one of those where we do need infrastructure to be, you can't teach if you don't have the proper infrastructure to do so. And I'm kind of trying to define how ESSER dollars defined in their safety was one thing and infrastructure was a different thing. So like safety for some reason included parking lots, but it did not include like a new library or something like that.
Some of the improvements are also for learning, right?
Right. That's yeah.
So maybe it's for improved learning and safety or something like that, or increased learning, or something about the educational value of.
Yeah. Like I'm thinking like libraries and media centers. Those would not be for safety purposes, but if you look at schools across, like I'm particularly thinking about the schools that not my school district, but a school that my nephews and nieces are going to, that their library is in a hallway because that's where it has to be. So yeah, so I think that's fine. Investment in facilities for improved
Well, let's say needed improvements.
I was going to say we can update it to just say investment in infrastructures
Mhm.
or, facilities and infrastructure.
Yeah, and maybe that's it, and not put in the safety purposes. I think that limits the scope.
I wonder if we should keep facilities, after this conversation, if we should keep facilities separate from the mental health. I mean, in our budgets, we have capital funds that are separate, and we just think about it differently. I'm fine if we want to keep it together. I totally understand why we went down that path, but we definitely don't combine the way we think about allocating those funds locally in that way.
Yeah, I'm
I agree.
Katie, I'm looking at it that way too.
Yeah, and that I would agree. We don't do it either, but I think we need to have something about that infrastructure, and it may just be a standalone bullet, because
Yeah,
I don't want someone having to justify a new library and making it a safety purpose. Like, no, we just need a new library.
Exactly. Or like if you have an additional number of students and you need a new building, you can't.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I think, Ginger, what it would be is go back to the original way you had that bullet for the safety purposes, and then add another standalone as investment in infrastructure. Does that make sense?
And may want to put underneath it the staffing for the infrastructure, which right now I think is a separate bullet, right? Support staff.
Well, I gotta say, Ginger, you are really good at this. I'd have the awfulest mess on this right now.
And to do it with everybody watching, I was thinking the same thing, I wouldn't even try it.
Well, I appreciate your all's patience as I work to get it to represent what you all are saying. So.
If you all knew her husband, this is nothing compared to what she has to do at home every day.
I'm glad this is on recording, and I might share this with him later.
Please share this with Darren. I want him to hear me say that.
So I think we're in a good place. Is there anything else we need to kind of bullet in?
So if investment in infrastructure, I think that got put in the wrong place. Wait, I'm sorry. Are you saying support staff comes under investment in infrastructure? Is that where?
Well, I was trying to get custodial and maintenance in there.
And I guess I'm looking at infrastructure as not an employee.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think support staff needs to come.
And were you saying to Lisa that investment in facilities and investment in infrastructure were together, or were those supposed to stay separate?
I'm saying that's this investment in facilities and infrastructure is a standalone, not having, I don't want to have to put the for safety purposes with that.
So you want to take off this part and just say investment in facilities and infrastructure, no safety. Is that right?
So, and then, yes, I think that's what I'm saying, but they're under the investments to create a physically and emotionally safe environment. You may need to still put in investments in infrastructure for that, because that may be more of the the scans for coming in the doors and that kind of stuff, which would be a different type of infrastructure that I'm talking about, like for a school library. Yes, that's it. That's my thought. No, y'all can definitely override me.
Does that make sense to others? Okay, I'm not going to read all of this back to you all because obviously you have it on your screen, but I am going to scroll through here and let you look through this and see if there's anything that I've misplaced, misrepresented, before we kind of close this part out.
I'm going to throw one thing out there for you all to think about for a second. We've got high quality teachers, we've got high quality administrators, but we just say we want to help support staff. We've all seen what a high quality support staff person looks like versus one that's not very high quality. And I know it's harder to find folks for some of those roles, but boy, when we support them the right way and put them in position to be successful, they sure make a difference for kids. So I would just say high quality support staff down there.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Anything where I'm missing, I need to update, edit?
The only other thing that caught my eye at that time, Ginger, was the equitable early gifted at testing, which I, again, in an ideal world would absolutely provide. But I'm for me personally, I mean, I want to make sure we have a high quality teacher in every classroom first. And so the must have there is not as essential, but I'm happy to yield to the group if they want to keep it there.
That stands out to me too. I think that, again, if we're testing but we don't have the teacher to teach it, it doesn't make any difference. I'm wondering if we can't put that under one of the bullets for maybe the one of the other things that's already listed there. I don't think it's a standalone at all, because I think, you know, I think the number is 3% of the population would test for gifted. So that's, to me, not as important.
I'd put that under the academic supports category. It kind of fits in there in my mind.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Does that work for the rest of the group?
Works for me. I would like to keep it in the must-have. I do think it's an equity issue in a lot of communities, so I like it put it there, not as a standalone, but within that.
All right, I will save this and share this back out with the group, but this will also be the document that I share over as your all's feedback for that base must-have list. And I'll switch back over. I know we're right at time. But
let me ask one more question. Do we have special education anywhere in here?
We have specific supports for students with disabilities and then also paraprofessionals for students with disabilities.
Okay. Yeah.
One question, there is no comment here about a superintendent or a director of schools or central office. Is that something we need to?
Well, would that not be in the administrator? part of it. I mean, I think leadership administrator, maybe that's what we need to be, high quality qualified administrators, or is it administrators in leadership or something like that? Because I do think your directors, your HR directors, all of those people
There you
should
go.
have, instead of just being school-based, it should be district as well.
I
Yeah,
like the
take care.
addition of school and district. Yeah, nice. No, all right. Ginger, do we want to look, if you would go back to, do we want to, do we need, I think when you and I talked, do we need to endorse this? Or
These are the, you all saw most of these last time. That last requested feedback from the group is just a little more clarification from what was shared before. And just that county commissioners are, based on some of the local match conversation, want to reconsider some of the local match side of things as conversations continue to evolve around that. And then that maintenance of effort part would not, should not change for districts moving forward. So thinking about some of the, not letting the state funds supplant some of those things that are happening there. So not a lot of change here from what you guys saw previously.
do you need an endorsement from us on this? Are we good?
You're good unless there are, like broad overall feedback pieces that you all would want to add here based on comments that you've been reading or feedback you've received.
That's good. Let's take us on.
Do you want me to move to outcomes, or do you want to move here to the base?
I thought we were going to do outcomes next. If we can start there, that would be good.
Dan, what time is this meeting supposed to be over?
Now.
Okay, I've got a 12:30, but I'm happy to hold on if we think we're going to be done in a few minutes.
If you could give us 8 more minutes, can we all stay till quarter of?
That works for me.
Great. I don't know that we'll get it done in 8 minutes, but here are the outcomes that so far folks have suggested for incentives. I think the questions for us to consider, are there others? What's most important from this list? And then I think another question is, are we providing incentives for every student who takes a AP course, or just for historically underserved students? So there's sort of bigger questions on those. But first, is this the right list?
Should graduation be on there? I mean, I'm just asking.
In the past, it has caused a negative, when we've started measuring graduation rates, sometimes we incentivize districts to graduate when we've met, that's the only thing that first came to mind, but I hear you. I mean, they've got to graduate to do something next, so.
I understand that, yeah. It's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
I do think that the the EPSOs and the AP course completion should be somehow combined, because APs are not in every, we have AP Access for All now, which is wonderful, but they're not necessarily in every school. Some schools use different EPSOs, so I wouldn't want to hindrance them.
And AP is listed as an EPSO, right? So as is IB, as is some other things. So yeah, I do think the reading proficiency, I think we have to figure out how we'd measure that, but that is, I think, the one that I would argue is most important, particularly by 3rd grade.
Have we not considered middle school math or 8th or 9th grade algebra? Or in this, I think 9th grade algebra is what we're focused on, but it seems like it's missing.
I'm also curious about the differentiated compensation support. That, you know, the state has had differentiated compensation plans for years, and I'm not sure that that's translated into outcomes, or I'm just not sure what that piece means in terms of outcomes. I love it. I want teachers to be paid differently based on their skills, but I'm just not, I'm not seeing the connection there directly yet.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Also, maybe if we have somebody next time to ask about, because I would agree. And I also think there's a question about, is it differentiated compensation for scores? Is it about closing a gap? Is it about both? Is it about working in high need schools? There are different ways to compensate differently, and they have different results and different purposes. So are we in agreement? I couldn't tell on the issue of 8th grade or 9th grade math. I thought there was consensus on that as an outcome. Yeah.
Yes.
Can we add that, Ginger?
Yes, so we're going to suggest that 8th or 9th grade math be added as an outcome on this list, or is there one grade level we want to push over another?
I always lean to 9th, but yeah, algebra 1, yeah, completed by 9th, but I think every district's a little different.
Yeah, no, we have a big push on algebra 1 in 8th grade for those that are ready for it.
So is it on-time completion of algebra 1, or?
Yeah, I think that's a good way.
Here's a question for those districts, and I'm sitting in one of them that doesn't have, we're an elementary district and there's several of us across the state. Where's our outcome? Because these are all high school based. They may not make, there may be few enough of us that it doesn't make a difference.
Yours would be reading for sure, but I hear you. Are you K-6? What is your?
Yeah, pre-K-6. Yeah. And a lot of the city schools are like that because
Yep.
or special districts and things. So I wouldn't hold up on that based on, it's just because that'll be where the state has to figure out things. It's not, with 8 minutes left, I wouldn't have a long conversation about it. Just wanted to throw it out there.
But it's a legitimate concern for sure.
Okay, so just so that I have this clear on this one, we would like to see on-time completion of Algebra 1 added to this list. The group wants to make sure that EPSOs and AP are not separated in this because of the offerings at different schools. We want to make sure those are stay connected within the outcomes portion of the funding formula. And there was also a conversation about reading proficiency being one of the highest priority outcomes. Is the group in agreement on that one as well? Okay. Is there anything else I've missed from this conversation that I need to make sure I include?
I need some clarification. Is an industry cert also an EPSO? I thought
We call them EPSOs in Nashville.
Yeah. So could we not put that as well as a work-based learning completion metric? Could those not all be within the EPSO umbrella, under the EPSO umbrella?
Okay, so it sounds like the first 4 bullets, this group is in agreement with keeping all of those on there and would want to make sure that none of those get separated within that. So if it comes down to it, like, we don't want any of these voted off the island. Is that accurate?
I guess I was thinking more that we are moving towards a literacy outcome, a numeracy outcome, and an EPSO outcome.
I think there will be potentially multiple outcomes, not a laundry list of them, but multiple outcomes. And so it could be that there is like the early post-secondary one, and within that, there's different criteria. And so that would kind of fall into that policy part of what are all those things that define that early post-secondary one. If what you all just shared about the on-time completion of algebra, then there could be that the math side of that, and then the reading one as well. The differentiated compensation, sounds like this group just needs a little more conversation about what that looks like to really see how that ties to the outcomes piece.
Maybe that's a question for next week or 2 weeks from now. All right, we're pretty far along on outcomes here, or did I miss something? Are there others? What's most important? I guess the question is, and maybe we don't have enough time, but I'll ask it. Are we thinking that districts would be rewarded for each student, or only for students, who typically have not made that achievement? And frankly, I wonder, could you do both, but reward more heavily for a group of students who typically have not been, who've been underserved, who haven't been on time reading in 3rd grade? You might get 3x versus those who were more commonly. Some way to weight the outcome. Do we want to think about that, or are we in agreement on that?
I like that, Dan.
I do too. I like that idea.
So weighted outcomes, weighted incentives in those areas, so that every district would get rewarded, but moving students who typically have not made that level would get rewarded more. So there's an incentive to focus. Okay. And it feels like we have 3 broad areas for these, right? On our outcomes. All right, I think we're in a good place, or I'll observe a good place. And Ginger, is there we meet in 2 weeks. Could you give us a little more information, if you have it, about what we will get from the state between now and then about a draft funding formula?
I don't have details on exactly what that will look like, other than what you shared earlier. It'll be focused on the components of the formula. It will not contain actual, amounts or numbers. There will be a week of public comment for that draft, and you all should have the comments from the public at that time, but I don't know that you'll have a lot of lead time on those specific comments, just because of taking feedback from this meeting, including that in the draft, getting that draft out to the public, getting comments from everybody. So there may not be a ton of lead time on that part. And trying to think if there's anything else materials wise. So the next meeting will be focused on really kind of responding from that draft, if there's anything else from this conversation and from that conversation that you'd like to see adjusted in that formula, added to, taken out, what have you. And then we'll also have our expert joining from that time, from that meeting as well. That may help with both thinking about the formula part that you're seeing, and also leading up to that policy discussion for meeting 6.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks everybody for staying way past time. I think we're in a pretty good place and moving forward. So.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dan and Ginger. You guys are great.
Yeah. Can I suggest that we actually expand it next time, just so that we're not rushed? I would rather expand the time and get out early, as to constantly get at the end and going, okay, let's
rush.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we allowed to do that, Ginger? Can we go for 90 minutes next time?
I can certainly ask.
Okay, that's all.
Thanks, I agree.
All right.
Okay,
Thank
everybody.
you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.